Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. In this episode, we sit down with Matt Gilbert, co-founder of Gilbert and Purdue Transaction Advisors, to delve into the intricate world of mergers and acquisitions. With a wealth of experience in navigating the complexities of M&A for private held companies, Matt shares his invaluable insights on the unique challenges business owners face when they consider an exit strategy. Matt, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, John Paul. I really appreciate you having me on today.
By the way, before we begin on the in-depth questions, because I do have some, do you mind giving us a quick intro on who Matt is, what's your experiences, expertise, and what keeps you busy these days?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for giving me the microphone. I am a serial entrepreneur. In the first 30 plus years of my working life, I was a founder or a co-founder of a number of different businesses. The first one and the last one, we grew quite large, and we sold those businesses to public companies. A couple of them in the middle grew quite large, and we were able to sell those to private equity firms. And in growing those businesses, I and my partners were able to successfully acquire a number of companies to make ours larger or to spread us into new geographies. And all that buying and selling and growing companies for ourselves uh, was a real education for what I do now, which is my partner and I own a merger and acquisition transaction firm. So for the last 8 years, we have been helping other business owners when they want to retire or slow down or phase out or outright sell their company.
That's a very interesting choice of career because most of the serial entrepreneurs that we see after doing their businesses, hiring and selling their business, goes into the venture capitalist route of things. So, why did you choose to go on the M&A side of things?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And basically, I live in Houston. Our practice is nationwide, but around town, every time we bought or sold a company, we would be in the newspaper. There would be a buzz in the community, and so a lot of people that I did business with, a lot of vendors and customers and whatnot, knew that I had been part of buying and selling businesses for decades. And when they had come to do this their one time in their life, I just found people very frequently asking me for my advice, asking me to help them get prepared, tell them what's coming, avoid the pitfalls that come with being the first time seller and those kind of things. And after a while, I had a passion for helping my fellow business owners take that step and to do it really well. The other thing is there's a giant $3 trillion a year machine in the United States in the merger and acquisition community. And if I have a client or a friend who owns a local family business. They've got 50 or 60 employees, and they need to sell the company, or they want to, transition out of the business. The odds of them doing that successfully and doing that well are really stacked against them as a first timer who's never done anything. So, I just my team and my business partner and we really have a heart for those business owners who are entering this stage in their career, and we want to see them do well and not get taken advantage of by the big machine out there that is incentivized to buy companies below market value.
Especially because of the fact that I don't think people realize that selling a business, especially once you owned it for decades, is like letting go of a child.
Oh yeah, yeah, it really is. It's so. I have a saying, and we've learned this the hard way in our practice. The
Yeah,
the business owner or the shareholder group, they have to be emotionally ready for this event in their
yeah,
life, right? And then on the other side, the business itself is an entity with a personality of
yeah.
its own and a culture of its own, and it also has to be ready. So, in order for this to work, both of those kind of
Yeah.
have to come together, and they both have to be ready simultaneously for this event to go well.
Would you say that you were naturally led into the path of doing M&A since you are selling and buying a lot of businesses beforehand?
Yeah, absolutely. But the way that I would characterize that
Yeah.
is, yeah, I've been out in the M&A world my entire adult life, mostly as kind of a solo artist.
Yeah.
And when we look back through my history, there are a couple of dozen transactions, especially when I was younger,
Yeah.
that we attempted and we failed, and learning so much from those failures. You know, it's embarrassing to talk about when you tried to buy a company and you fail, but that's where all the learning comes from, right? And then when we went and we sold our companies, you know, the first couple of times I sold one of our businesses, or my partners and I sold, um, in hindsight, now that I do this for a living, we could have done so much better.
Yeah.
But we didn't know what we didn't know, and we really felt like being a great operator translated to skills that would work to be a great seller, and that rarely is the case. And so, you know, just learning all these things over and over, decade after decade, stacking them on top of each other. Now, you know, I'm so proud that we have a
Yeah.
playbook that we can adapt to certain businesses that fit our playbook and our model. And we can go out and we can really
Yeah.
maximize an exit for an owner in a way that I never got to do because we were practicing on our companies.
Yeah. Just I just wanna reiterate the point on not because you're a great operator or you're a great business owner, you're not gonna be a great seller as well because there's a lot of points that people don't notice when they're selling a business. It doesn't just need to be profitable. There's a lot of factors that needs to be done and checked before selling it. Do you mind talking about those points?
Yeah, absolutely. So the value of a business is a
Yeah.
range, right? It's
Yeah.
if you've got a $25 million revenue plumbing company, the value of that business might be from 16 million to 30 million, right? And so what makes you trade or be valuable at the low end of that value range versus what makes you have value at the high end of that range? It's the strength of your management team. It's how fast you turn your cash. It's you know, what kind of leverage do you have with your suppliers in the marketplace? It is do you have recurring revenue, or is all of your work new construction? You know, there's an efficiency to how well the assets of your business translate into cash flow for your business, which translates into net profit. And the more efficient that those assets translate all the way to net profit, the more valuable your business is going to be. And so, you know, when a buyer comes to acquire a privately held business, what they're really wanting to do, everybody has a hard time articulating this, but they're trying to buy your future cash flow, right? And so when you back into that, you say, okay, how can we de-risk an acquisition that purchases a future cash flow? Well, if your top sales guy is 73 years old, that's a risk, right? You know, or if all your trucks and equipment are broken down and they're old and they're not reliable, that's a risk,
Yeah.
right? If the lease left on your facility and your facility is integral to what you do only has 8 months left in it, that's a risk. If we have to move the business,
Yeah.
our customers can't find us anymore. So there's literally probably 100 variables that we could talk about that move the needle from the low end
Yeah.
of the value range to the high end of the value range. And there's a whole niche marketplace in studying that, valuing it, helping
Yeah.
business owners get positioned to maximize this event
Yeah.
when they do exit.
I think one of the most common things that people don't realize before selling a business is the fact that it's very important to try and remove yourself from that business before trying to sell it.
Yeah, it's a great insight. You look young. I don't know how old you are, but you got a good thoughts about this, right? So, if a lot of people will come
Yeah.
to me and say, "Hey, I've got a nice business. I'm doing $4 million a year. I want to sell it," and then when we look at the business, what we
Yeah.
really say is, "You're selling your job,
Yeah.
right? Nobody wants to buy your job. People
Yeah.
want to buy a company, right?" And so, a lot of times, the counsel to a lot of smaller business owners is, hey, find a way to remove yourself from the day to day. and find a way to set that business up where it can operate in your absence. Because when you sell the company, it's going to be in your absence that it continues on, and that's a way to de-risk the transaction for your buyer. When you de-risk it, you get a higher sales price.
They're trying to sell their business as a business instead of a because most of the time, most of the especially the small businesses, it's not a business, it's a personal brand that they're operating on the daily. So I think, yeah, as you said, they need to remove themselves on the day to day.
Yeah, it happens a lot. A lot of service businesses, the way they started
Yeah,
is a technician or a salesman will leave a company, take a couple of customers, and start his own company.
yeah,
Right? He's not a he didn't go to get an MBA at Stanford. He's not strong in most of the areas of business, but he's super strong in the technical side or super strong in the sales side. So he surrounds himself with a bunch of people who have the strengths that he's missing,
yeah,
and they create a company out of that. But the problem is when you remove that individual from the middle of the wheel,
yeah,
then the company begins to fall apart. And so, yeah, as people prepare for the
yeah,
event or the time in their life that they want to sell, it's really good to look at, where do I sit in the flow of things? And if I were to take a 2 month vacation and go to Mexico, would my company still operate as smoothly without me as it does with me?
yeah. Can you talk about the main differences that a small mom and pop shop might have compared to a well established company with a few employees?
Yeah. So the number one thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is actual processes and procedures, right? So a lot of smaller businesses, mom and pops, they have what I would call tribal knowledge. Everybody comes to work; they all kind of know what to do to get through the day and to make the company work. But if any one of those people, you know, got ill or injured or whatever, and they kind of fell out of the thing, you lose a lot of that tribal knowledge. And if you lose too much of it, your business isn't worth anything. So the step for those type of companies to become more valuable and to grow is to actually take those things that are tribal and turn them into set processes and procedures where you can cross train employees and interject people who've never been here, and they can grab a manual or whatever and execute on the things that are necessary to serve your customer. Right, serving your customer brings in a dollar, and that begins to compound on itself. So we call that scalability, and most smaller businesses lack the forethought into being scalable, and that's why they're small, and that's why they're not as valuable as they could be. So if you have a couple of years to work on your
Yeah.
business before you're ready to sell, work on that scalability component, and you'll be a lot more valuable when it comes times to change hands.
In your company, do you only do seller? Do you only represent sellers, or do you also represent buyers?
That's a great question. So, our company is now almost 9 years old. We started out seller focused,
Yeah,
right? And there's a lot of nuances with that, accounting and HR and inventory and real estate and all that. We got that down pretty good. And then 2021, I think, we acquired a buy side firm, and we added buy side capabilities in house. So now we kind of have a seller focused group, and we have a buy side group, and in the middle we have a consulting practice.
in your opinion, which part of the business do you find more interesting, the selling or the buying?
Oh, for sure. For me, the
Yeah,
selling. My heart is for those individuals and
yeah,
those groups who have taken an idea, turned it into a business, created a marketplace, built jobs in a community, took the risk, borrowed the money, built a facility. All those things that it took to get from an idea to a thriving business that's employing people and generating revenue.
yeah,
I just have a passion for those people, and so now, other people in my firm, like we have a guy who's the director of our buy side group.
yeah,
He's totally the opposite. He has a passion for people who want to buy businesses and take them to the next level and help them do that. So we complement each other really well. But
yeah,
for me, I love working with an entrepreneur who's reached the point in their career where they want to bring on either a capital partner to help them grow the business and they step back a little bit,
yeah.
or completely sell it outright and find the perfect buyer that they'll be proud of.
For someone who might have a great customer base, but they're essentially holding down a job as a company, how what advice can you give to that guy to actually help his business be sellable?
Yeah, so there's a term that I use quite a bit. It's called acquihire, and that's acquiring a company by hiring the key guy who has all the relationships and all the contacts, right? And that's usually smaller businesses or smaller companies. And so I use that term acquihire a lot because if you can hire that guy, you practically get everything. So if you're that guy, right, and you want to make yourself more valuable, then you've got to learn to um, hand relationships off to somebody that you're training in the business, maybe on the sales side. Create an operations focused management role, bring in a controller to manage the accounting, and really put strong people in place that are key positions in the business. And then the company has to show a trajectory that doing that made the business scale up a little bit and not fall back when you let go. Um, a lot of times, those people will try to hire, and successfully hire a bunch of folks that look exactly like them, and they do things exactly like them. And you don't want to hire a clone. That diversity in there is really important to making your company less vulnerable and less risky to a buyer. So the thing to do is really professionalize the business by creating a director of sales, a director of marketing, a director of operations, a director of, or some companies will call them vice presidents. But you got to get all those roles divided up and divvied out because they are a full time job if you're busy enough, right? So if one guy's doing all those jobs or half of those jobs, if you can carve them out and make them busier, your company's going to grow.
I have one question. I'm not sure if this is an actual thing, but it might be. You said if your top sales guy is 60 years old or something, then there's a chance that they might just leave or basically endanger the cash flow of the company if they left. So, is there an ideal age range for you to actually hire people? Let's say it's better to hire people between 30 to 50 years old because they don't look as inexperienced as the guy in the 20s or as old as his guy on the 60s.
Yeah, I've done this a million times. I've never gotten that question. So that's an interesting question. I don't think there's an ideal age
Yeah,
range. What I will tell you is buyers begin to get a little nervous when key employees are 60 years old and older,
yeah,
right? So if you're going to have a key position and be growing employees in that
yeah,
position. They should probably be in younger than
yeah,
60 and have a little runway in front of them. If you have employees who are 60 or older in key
yeah,
positions now, you need to be training up somebody under them who can eventually take over in that role. So
yeah,
a lot of times, especially like we just did a transaction where the top sales guy was 71, I think.
yeah,
And we're like, hey, this is going to be a risk. Buyers are going to discount your value for it. So let's get somebody that guy believes can figure out what he does, do it well, serve his customers well, and let's have this person shadow him while we're in the process. So we hired a person in his mid 30s to shadow that guy and begin to transfer
yeah,
some of those relationships over to that younger person. Then when the buyer came along and they said, hey, this is a problem, we said, no, it's not a problem. For 7 months, we've already been shadowing and transferring relationships. And once they kind of studied that, figured out the transition that we were making, they got very comfortable with it. So
yeah,
there's a way. So here's the deal: surprises ruin transactions, right?
yeah,
And so if in your planning stage, in your preparation stage, and you're thinking about, I'm getting ready for an event, you want to have self reflection. You want to get
yeah,
a transaction advisory team, and you want to say, hey, where are the surprises in this thing that
yeah,
if they come out at the wrong time, they're gonna run our buyer off or they're gonna run our lender off.
yeah.
And then and every company has them. There's no company without a surprise closet somewhere. And so you find that thing
Yeah.
and you tackle it head on and you prepare it. You don't hide from it.
In your experiences, what are these most common surprises that you see?
The most common surprises are. uh, financial reporting that isn't accurate. So there's a an exercise called quality of earnings exercise, and when a buyer, a sophisticated buyer, is buying a privately held business, they're going to take the books and records of that business. They're going to give them to a forensic accounting firm, and they're going to ask for a quality of earnings report. In that quality of earnings, every single time, literally 100% of the time, they're going to find accounting irregularity, things that were put in the wrong place, things that were captured incorrectly, insurance issues, lots of costs in the wrong bucket, lots of moving a cost from one year to another year in the bookkeeping, things like that. And so that's the biggest thing, accounting surprises. If you can get with a firm, go through your own quality of earnings exercise before you go to market, try to sell the business. You
Yeah.
work out all those things. You highlight the irregularities. It's not a big deal to have an irregularity. It's a big
Yeah.
deal if it's a negative surprise. And so other surprises are don't try to hide the fact that you and your partners aren't getting along.
Yeah.
Don't try to hide the fact that you might be getting divorced soon. Don't try to hide the fact that there may be a lawsuit pending. Those kind of things, they're going to come out. If somebody's
Yeah.
going to come in here and write you a multi-million dollar, 8-figure, 9-figure check, I
Yeah.
promise you, they're going to turn over every stone and they're going to find out all the things that. So you just, be transparent, be
Yeah.
authentic, be straightforward, and work with a team. When's the smartest time to release this kind of negative information? Because there's a
Yeah.
time where you can share that information and not kill the deal. If you share it too early, run your buyer off.
Yeah.
Share it too late, blows the deal up. But there's a correct time to be honest and forthright with every piece of information. So those are the kinds of surprises that really throw a wrench in transactions. And surprisingly,
Yeah.
we hear about those surprises in 85 to 90% of M&A transactions that are out there. So that's why a national average in the United States, only 20% of the companies that go to market to be sold
Yeah.
actually close a sale. There's an 80% failure rate. It's the surprises and it's the preparation
Yeah.
and it's the playbook that they're running. And so you got to get all these things right in the beginning in order to be successful in the end.
Oh, you mentioned that you shouldn't hide the fact that you're getting a divorce. Isn't that actually important to the deal?
Yeah, it's incredibly important. Most buyers are going to want the seller to stick around and train them after the close.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, especially nowadays, the way that the sales structure is set up, the buyer will actually stay and work or the seller will actually stay and work for the buyer for a few years sometimes. And so, one of the first things that happens is if that buyer is intending for the seller to stay in the
Yeah.
business after the close, is they're going to do a background check. I've got buyers now that are running psychology checks on their clients. They're going to go through the legal
Yeah.
system and make sure that you haven't filed for divorce or been in a wreck and there's a lawsuit against you or you've got a medical situation you aren't disclosing. All those things are going to come out
Yeah.
not because you told them, but because they've done their due diligence. So it's better for them not be surprised by the due diligence,
Yeah.
but for you to tell them up front, hey, would you go check me out? These are the things you're going to find. Let's talk about them now and make sure that they're not something that's going to run you off.
Especially since COVID, there's been a huge trends of virtual offices. Do you mind letting us know if there's a huge drawback on the valuation of a company if the offices are basically virtual and non-existent?
Yeah, so we find that the majority of our clients who have at least some sort of virtual office, it makes them more valuable. They have a reduced expense. If the best employee for a job doesn't live within 30 minutes of the office, they can't work here. But if they have a virtual office, they could live 500 miles away and it doesn't matter. So you're able to hire the best employee for the job. And so I'm going to use the word efficiency. In most cases, having a virtual office that's done correctly makes the business more efficient, and that makes it more valuable. So it's all. The other thing is there's a term called capital expenditures, and the trend in M&A right now in the lower end of the market, where most of our listeners are, is companies that have low capex business models. So a virtual office is practically the lowest capex business model there is for office. And so all those things kind of converge to make an efficiency equation come about, and that makes the business more valuable.
Let's say you're a person who's selling your business and you don't want to hire somebody to actually look at things. What are the most common quick fixes that you can do on your business to actually make it more valuable?
Yeah, so find a big mirror, a full length mirror, and look in it and stare at it hard, because that what you see is probably the problem and the solution, right? Most business owners are the reason the company is successful, but they're also just their personalities, their proclivities, the way they like to do things, the way they like to report. They're also the reason that the company gets stuck at a certain level, right? And so a proper self-examination, if you're not going to bring in a firm like ours, is the place to start. And then ask yourself, how efficient are we turning our inventory? If you've got inventory out in the warehouse that isn't turning as fast as the industry, then you're below par at that particular thing compared to your peers, and so that will bring your valuation down. Now, all the things where you're below par compared to your peer group are areas where you need to take a look and see if there's a way to improve it prior to going to market. And you can't improve it a couple of days before going to market. You have to do it at least a few quarters, if not a year or two before going to market, so that we can show a trend that your improvements are actually doing the thing correctly.
I don't know if this have an actual effects on the price of the business. Is there a case where the time of the year actually affects how much people are more willing to spend on a business that they're going to?
So in our space,
Yeah,
our business sales start at about 10 million and go to about 100 million in revenue.
yeah,
So at that size, no, there's no cyclicality, there's no seasonality
yeah,
on the calendar. Now there are issues with interest rates,
yeah,
right? Interest rates going up and down affect business buying. The smaller businesses, franchises, Main Street firms, and things like restaurants, they all have a seasonality, a cyclicality component to
yeah,
them. And there's definitely a timing component on the calendar for
yeah,
those. But we don't really see that once you get up into the larger business. And, it's more sensitive to what we call business cycles, and they don't
yeah,
really run on the calendar. But every business sector has a ebb and a flow. Right now, most sectors in the
yeah,
United States are experiencing record high valuations. We don't expect that to last forever. It'll cycle back toward the
yeah,
the historic. And so, if somebody's thinking about exiting in the next 1 to 5 years, uh, they should probably look into accelerating that time frame and getting out earlier rather than later, because we're at historical high
yeah.
valuations.
On the pandemic, because most of the businesses that are being sold takes months, if not years, to actually be sold, and there's a lot of process that needs to be done. What happened when the pandemic came around? Did it ruin a lot of deals, or did it just had a huge pause on it?
Yeah, so 100% of the deals that we were
Yeah,
working on and involved with either died
yeah,
because primarily because you couldn't get the buyer and the seller together. There was distancing and fear and all that kind of stuff, and so people weren't getting together. We couldn't take airline flights, things like that, or most of them just got delayed, right? And the reason they died is the lending community went on
yeah,
hiatus, and they weren't bringing cash to the table. So once the lenders got back in the swing of things, and the fear kind of died down, even though we were dealing with the pandemic still, we were able to function in the business world of borrowing money and putting together transactions. Once those lenders came back to the table, probably took about 6 months. Then there were new processes and we had to figure out kind of how to work through that. Most of those
yeah,
deals got revived at that point, and we ended up
yeah,
doing them just a little bit in a delayed fashion instead of not at all. If a business
yeah,
experienced just a crash in their revenue during COVID, then they really weren't financeable. And those are the few. We didn't have very many in our. Some of my peers were heavily focused in businesses like that, and most of those businesses never ended up transacting.
How much along in the pandemic did you see people's fear actually, get?
The pandemic was really interesting to me personally.
Yeah,
I deal with business owners, right?
yeah,
And these are very resourceful people. When they see a problem, they look for a solution and they begin to employ the solution.
yeah,
And what I saw in the pandemic was brilliance and creativity and figuring out ways with these new fears and new
yeah,
societal rules to still keep people employed,
yeah,
still keep our valuable goods and services. And I had one client who's turned out to be a really good friend. He converted his whole manufacturing process to uh, uh, like the hand sanitation
yeah,
process, and he was making millions of gallons of sanitizer, and he was delivering them to first aid uh, places,
yeah,
hospitals, police departments, fire stations, and just giving it away for free. And then when the pandemic kind of died down, he turned his apparatus back to producing his normal goods and services and went right back to work. But he gave away, I think it's millions of ounces of sanitation to emergency service providers. So the pandemic obviously hit everybody different, and it was weird, and it's a
yeah,
one time thing in our life, hopefully. But I just saw the humanitarian side of people come out and just rise to its highest level.
yeah,
I thought it was wonderful to see stories like that play out and be a little role in
yeah.
helping them do those things.
Speaking on the humanitarian side of things, do you see that there's an influx of buyers that prefers buying businesses that are actually environmental friendly, or is there not?
Yeah, yeah. So any niche that you
Yeah,
can think of. There's so many buyers out there now, and so much capital that's being formed into
yeah,
funds and groups. So there's probably, if I looked in my CRM, there's probably 200 uh, equity groups who have an environmental focus
yeah,
on their acquisition criteria. Or you might say, give me groups that have a focus on
yeah,
solar energy, right? They create funds that are very narrowly focused into that. And then what's interesting is most people think of solar energy, they think of solar panels and things like that. But these groups will also go out and they'll vertically integrate the supply chain for those solar
yeah,
energy companies. So they may buy a nut and bolt maker, they
yeah,
may buy a bag manufacturer or a film manufacturer, something that you and I would think has nothing to do with solar energy, but it's part of their vertical supply chain. And so for us, we kind of have to look creatively at the supply chain and say, who might be a great buyer that other people aren't thinking about, and how do we bring those people to the table?
No, especially if you think about it on the investor side of things, if they're investing in these venture capital companies, they would like the fact that that company actually focuses on the environmentally friendly companies to invest in, not because there's a higher possibility of return, but also the fact that just feels good.
Yeah, yeah. There's a thesis around that. You could go the other way.
Yeah,
What are the industries that damage the environment and damage human
yeah,
health? Those are huge industries too. If you want to
yeah,
invest in tobacco or coal or things that certain people don't associate with being environmentally friendly, there are definitely focused funds that want to buy those things as well. So anything under the sun, there's a focus group out
yeah.
there who's willing to come in and acquire a business in that space.
The rise of automation and artificial intelligence, did you see a lot more improvement in the efficiency process of M&A companies, especially yours?
Yeah, I do. There's definitely like AI for doing data research and analytics. One of the other things that we've seen, in the last 7, 8, 10 years,
Yeah,
is offshoring jobs, right?
yeah,
So people in the Philippines make a lot less money than people in the United States. People in El Salvador,
yeah,
and so a lot of companies will, out offshore and outsource
yeah,
to full-time employees and also freelancers in an overseas market because the labor's cheaper. Or sometimes they want a group of people working 24/7, so their
yeah,
night crew is in another company on the other side of the world where it's daytime over there and they're not paying
yeah,
a different labor rate. So we're seeing all of those things. I mean, the world has gotten smaller and smaller with technology and with
yeah,
innovation and with artificial intelligence, and a lot of our clients are taking advantage.
yeah. And since we're nearing the end of the podcast, what advice would you give to entrepreneurs considering buying and selling business as a way to actually make money? So basically, buying and selling.
Yeah, don't try to go alone. The marketplace is designed to take advantage. If you're a business owner and you call your buddy who's an attorney, and the two of you think you're going to sell your company and beat a $1 trillion marketplace at that game, you're going to be the one who loses. So my thing would be is go out and find professionals to align with,
Yeah,
not just in legal, not just in accounting, but there are very specific M&A niches and disciplines, and you want to find those professionals to align with. They whatever they cost,
yeah,
they're going to make you back 7, 8, 10 fold in having a better transaction. That's both on the buy side and the sell side. It's no longer the type of thing where you can self perform and do well anymore.
By the way, is there a buyers and sellers market as well in M&A, or is it just on real estate?
No, it's totally an M&A. So in my CRM, we separate buyers and sellers and professionals
Yeah,
in everything we do. Typically, most buyers buy with a time horizon. So they'll
yeah,
buy your company and say in 3 to 5 years they want to improve it by so much, and then they want to sell it to the next guy. So often buyers will become sellers, and so those relationships are nice. Very seldom does a seller become a buyer, and so it's one of those deals. Now, one of my favorite employee groups is somebody who we've sold their company. If I've sold your business, you've been through the process. You know how hard it is. You know how we work, and you know kind of the nuances of things. Well, you make a great employee for us, helping the next business owner go through that same process. So there's a marketplace for everybody out there.
for anyone wondering or might be scared and want to actually hire an M&A, but they're very fearful of what the possible cost is. What's the actual cost of hiring an M&A? Just so they know.
It's that question is too open ended. If you're a small company, versus a huge company, the cost is different. And what I would say is, anybody that comes at me with that kind of thought process, I
Yeah,
say I want to talk you out of that thought. You're certainly going to have to spend a little money to
yeah,
make money, but I want you to look at value, not
yeah,
cost. Right? What do you need to achieve your goal, and what's the most efficient way to get that value? A
yeah,
lot of times it's not the cheapest cost, it's not the highest cost, but find that most
yeah,
efficient way to the value. To give you generalities, smaller companies uh,
yeah,
generally will cost 10 or 12% of enterprise
yeah,
value to sell. Much larger companies could cost 2 or 3% of enterprise value to sell. And it's a function of how much work does a team have to do. If
yeah,
we don't have to do a ton of work to achieve your objectives, then the cost is going to be lower. But if you come at us and you say, I want the highest possible valuation, and I got a business that isn't ready, well, now you've given us the two extremes, and that's going to cost a lot because the amount of work that it takes to achieve your objective is.
And for anyone who might be a first time seller, what books, tools, websites would you recommend for them to check out to actually learn?
Yeah, so the best thing that you can do is interview transaction advisors. There's a lot of books out there and I have a whole bookshelf full of them. If I know you and I know your personality and I know what you're trying to achieve, I could probably pull a book out and say, hey, this is pretty good because it's right down the fairway for what you are trying to do. But to just recommend a random book out there, what happens is so many people fall into the wrong process for what they're trying to achieve. And then they end up being a devastating statistic in the marketplace. Not because they didn't have a good business or not because they weren't trying to do something right, but they just fell into the wrong process. They trusted the wrong person. So the way to get around that is with the internet, everybody does self study. But even more so, go start interviewing transaction advisors. We interview with business owners every single day, and probably 20% of them feel like a fit. And then probably 50% of those actually become clients. But those 80% that don't feel like a fit, now I understand what they're trying to do, what kind of company they have, and I can recommend, hey, there's a guy I want to introduce you to because he does that really well. He does it better than we do. And so most of what we do in our firm actually is connecting business owners and other advisors because they're a better fit to accomplish the owner's objective.
And
Self study is pretty dangerous
yeah,
in this space. And so there's a million books, there's a million websites, there's conferences to go to and all that kind of stuff. But it's really dialing in. You've got
yeah,
a company, you've got a person, and you've got a marketplace, and you've got a lending community. How do
yeah.
those four things converge to make this work just right? You're not getting that out of a book or a podcast. It's very personal.
And last question is, what advice would you give to a buyer or a seller if they're thinking of doing it?
I would say be ready to kiss a lot of frogs because uh, most cases, businesses are going to show an attractive light. And when you
Yeah,
start looking under the tent and going to the back office and going through the warehouse and looking at old inventory and interviewing employees and interviewing customers and looking at the real estate lease, there's going to be a lot of stuff in there that what originally got you excited about a business that probably says, hey, it's not the best use of our capital. We should probably look elsewhere.
yeah,
So the process of looking for a buyer or looking for a seller is really
yeah.
one of just stay in the course and being patient till you find the one that works for you.
And for anyone who might be interested in learning more about you, where can they find you?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn. Matt, I think it's Matt C. Gilbert, might be Matthew
Yeah,
C. Gilbert on LinkedIn. We have a website,
yeah,
www.gap-advisors. The name of the firm is Gilbert and Purdue. I'm Matt Gilbert. All of those places have my cell phone number listed on them, and I answer my phone. So you're welcome to call me or text me. And my absolute favorite thing to do in the whole wide world is to talk to a new business owner who's beginning this journey or they're somewhere in this journey and they just are curious and they have questions. That's my
yeah.
favorite thing to do. So I would encourage you to find guys like me and just start talking about it with people who are in this world every single day. We have a totally different perspective than your brother in law who sold his company or your lawyer who helped a couple of guys sell a company last year. When you're in it every single day dealing with the lending and the borrowing and the real estate, the inventory and the HR lawsuits and all that stuff, it's just uh, something that you need to, you know, have a lot of conversations over and get comfortable with before you pull the trigger.
Again, I want to thank you for joining us on the New World podcast.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thank you.